In recent times, the kind of role that US has had, it has become more synonymous with war than with peace. At least as far as West Asia is concerned, it's not just West Asia. Whether you look at Europe, whether you look at the Korean Peninsula, whether you look at East Asia, whether you look at West Asia, and certain parts in Africa, which you obviously understand better than me. But the US has been involved if there is any conflict anywhere. So then, where does the concept of peace building come in? You see, these things were not always like this, and I've been studying global affairs closely, I would say, for since the time I joined WION. The US played a very different role, and the reason why US became central, or I would say pivotal, in achieving any kind of peace in any part of the world, that was the reason why US became a central figure in the world map. It wasn't because of it arming other nations. That wasn't the reason why US became what it became. It became this big power because of its role in establishing peace. And this essentially started after the Second World War. And, when the Second World War, of course, the economies around the world were in ashes. That is essentially when it all started. It was the US which brought in the Bretton Woods order and the system. And of course, at that time, the dollar, it became central to the global economy. So that is essentially how it all started. And along with that, also, that pretty much lasted from the 1940s to the 1970s. And it was like an adjustable peg system with every country fixing their currencies to an anchor currency, and that dollar became the anchor currency. So it's not as if US had like bigger aims at that point. They were gaining a lot more than they were offering at that point as well. I'm talking about 1944. Soon after that, the UN was formed in 1945. And soon after that, in 1949, NATO was formed as well. And of course, we know NATO, what it is in today's day and age and what it means. Coming to what things are like as of now. You see, the State Secretary, Anthony Blinken, he's been in West Asia. He has toured West Asia, I think, close to 10 times now in the last 11 months. But there is no ceasefire. And that should tell us as students of international affairs, as viewers, as educated citizens, as concerned citizens, that should tell us that how much control or how much influence US has in the region. It reflects on that. Or the other thing that it can reflect on is how much does the US really want to achieve peace? Because that is a question that has been raised. Is the US really keen on achieving a peaceful resolution here, or does it gain more from the conflict? Because that has become synonymous with the US in recent times, that wherever there is war, it aids the US economy. And I'll come to that in later parts, on concentrating on different countries. I'll take different references and I'll explain that point further. Coming to where things stand as of now, when, West Asia is concerned, Israel and Palestine. And when we say Israel and Palestine, to be very frank, if any one of you open the map and you try to see, it's so ironical that that geopolitics is being determined by a war which is being fought between two nations, which you will perhaps need a magnifying glass to find on the map. You won't be able to find Gaza Strip on the map. Even if you try to look, if you brought the map here, you won't be able to see it. But the effect it has all over the world, that is because the US is involved and Israel is involved. Of course it is. Now, the nations around it, on one side you have the Gaza Strip, above Israel you have the West Bank, then further you have Jordan, you have Lebanon, you have Iran, which is bottom, thoda niche ki taraf, it has towards the towards the other side. And then you have Yemen, which is beyond Saudi Arabia, and all of them get involved. Here, two players come to mind. It's the US and then it's Iran. These two players, they become pivotal in bringing in more, I would say, more countries into any kind of conflict which is being fought over there. Now, coming to the topic, which I want to just come to now, the Oslo Accords in 1993 were penned. And the Oslo Accords, you can easily study this. It was an agreement between Israel and the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They agreed that that it was interim self-government arrangements. They agreed that there will be a self-governing structure in Palestine. Israel agreed to that, and that was definitely, it kept some amount of peace in the region for some time. Of course, today those Oslo Accords are absolutely irrelevant. They're no longer in place. I think everything has gone out the window. If you see how things are shaping up in this region, it's a different world now. That's what I wanted to start with. In my understanding, in my reading, these are my personal thoughts. US has always exerted this form of aggressive diplomacy. Now, and I'll explain that to you. One is, I say, I don't see anyone else camera on, so I'll refer to you, Daramola, at the moment. One is, I extend my hand to you, Daramola. I say, let's shake hands, and let's understand each other, and let's agree on these terms. The other is, I get 5 people to stand behind me who are perhaps twice your size. I hold your collar and I say, let's understand these terms and let's agree to it. Which one seems softer?
The first one.
The first one. Of course. And that's how diplomacy has to be, which I mentioned in the beginning. It has to be gentle and soft. When you exert power, and now if I were to now just expand this onto a global stage and explain the same thing. When you come with your military might, or, if someone comes to you flexing their muscles and with 5 people standing behind them, you're intimidated. That is aggressive diplomacy, which I'm terming it aggressive diplomacy. That time has now gone where, that perception of the US was like, you are the big daddy on the world stage, and everyone just needs to do what you say. You're like the big bully in the yard. And what you say we need to follow, and that's how we all remain peaceful. It doesn't work like that anymore. Countries around the world have grown. They have grown militarily, they have grown in reach, they've grown in hard power, they've grown in soft power across the world. The global south is emerging like it never had earlier. There is a voice to the global south now. And all regions of the world. Today's day and age, you can't have that form of diplomacy that you have your biggest aircraft carriers parked in, I'm talking about the US here, that they have their biggest aircraft carriers parked in different oceans around the world. And then they say, we'll allow our chap to do what he wants to, but you can't escalate. So peace building can't happen that way. Peace building has to be done by dialogue and diplomacy. And diplomacy is not possible unless the stance is soft. Dialogue and diplomacy, that's exactly what the Indian Prime Minister also said. This is not the era of war. And I just want to reiterate that, because that one line pretty much sets the tone of what diplomacy has to be in today's day and age. So coming back to, I made a few notes. I'm a journalist, so I'm a little bound by habit. So I'll refer to those notes as well. I feel a few things that US needs to stop doing at the moment. Now, again, I'm an individual. I do not run a country, so my opinion can be flawed. It can be taken with a grain of salt. But as per what I have read and as per what I have studied, these are my thoughts. Making war for peace is bad idea. That we will fight till the end there is peace. No peace has been achieved by decimating another. We saw that once in the past. We've had 2 world wars. I don't think the world can afford to have a 3rd world war in today's day and age. So that I feel, if that stance is ever taken by the US, it should stop doing that. Second, aggressive diplomacy, as I mentioned, and I tried to explain it in the best way, in the simplest way I could. That needs to be rethought of. The stance towards nations in terms of dialogue and diplomacy has to be softer. It has to be on a level playing field. It can't be with the show of military might. And definitely, the world today is not relying on the dollar as it used to, perhaps in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and even somewhat in the 80s. Today we're moving towards de-dollarization. BRICS has been very instrumental in that. South Africa is very much a part of that. BRICS has only increased. Now, BRICS is not a counter to NATO. It's not a military arrangement. It's for economic arrangements for these countries to come together. And more countries want to be a part of it. That time when, I remember George Bush had said this, that you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. Maybe that worked for him when he had to retaliate after 9/11. But that can't be the stance today, because the world is not polarized with black and white. there are interests that each country has with each other. There could be warring nations which could be friends with the same nation. And we've seen that across the world in many, many areas. India itself has had great ties with Ukraine as well as Russia. India has good ties with Israel, and it has also, put its voice forward for the Palestinian cause. So that is very much possible, and dialogue is the only way to get that. I feel what US should do at this point, engagement. And engagement is very, very important. And I like to just quote an example. Like when there was a certain tussle between China and US. Till now, there were no military, not till now, but for almost a year in the middle, there were no military talks between US and China. Why? It should have been. That gap cannot come in today's day and age, especially with superpowers like US and China, which economies which are like the biggest and the second biggest economies in the world. They have to maintain dialogue. So there was a gap of almost 1 year that the US and China were not talking. There were no military talks. That kind of gap cannot come. Like in today's day and age, US and Russia, there is zero communication. That cannot afford to be done. There has to be some level of communication at every point. So I do feel, as of now, for peace building, engagement is very, very important. And that's why I'm citing these two examples. And of course, engagement with lesser guns on display. Engagement has to happen from here, and not by showing your muscles or by showing your number of guns you have. Multilateral peacekeeping force. I feel in the West Asian region, like Naramola, you told me, like the topic of discussion was, of course, focusing on West Asia. I do feel that, for a multilateral peacekeeping force in West Asia, it is important that the regional Arab and international allies, they get involved. Like personally, I feel Saudi Arabia needs to be a part of the peace talks. It can't happen with Jordan, Egypt, Qatar, and United States and Israel. Hamas already hardly has any kind of representation. Hamas is being backed by Iran. Iran is not part of these talks. Qatar is just a meeting ground. Egypt is just a meeting ground. Jordan is just a meeting ground. They can't bring peace to a region which is being, when the parties which are directly involved, they need to be a part of it. And I feel Saudi Arabia, UAE, these are very, very big nations, very wealthy nations. They need to be involved in these peace talks if we want to arrive at any kind of a conclusion anywhere. It really says a lot that the US personally is attempting to bring a ceasefire, and it has still not been able to do that. This is the biggest power that we're talking about in the world. What does that go to say? It just goes to say that, okay, there's one school of thought that says maybe US doesn't want a ceasefire, but I genuinely feel US is trying, because even for their domestic politics, it is very important that they secure this ceasefire. It will really be a big feather in the hat of the Democrats, especially leading up to the elections which are to be held in November. So I do feel they need to bring in regional Arab and international allies to be part of the peace talks, or to achieve any kind of ceasefire. And also rehabilitate itself in the Arab world. I feel what has happened in the past 1 year, that since US has been backing Israel, it has lost out on its ties that it had really strengthened in Saudi Arabia. And with Saudi Arabia also, certainly certain extent with the UAE. And in the process, Russia made inroads there. The reception that Mr. Vladimir Putin received in Saudi Arabia and UAE, it was something you perhaps will, it was the most grand reception that a king can receive, the honors with which he was received by these two nations when he visited the two nations last year. And that just went to say that, how far Russia has come in terms of its people building skills and its diplomacy, and how far back US has gone in terms of establishing its good relations in that region. So, of course, that has happened due to the Israel-Hamas war, which is still ongoing. And I'll come to that after that. US needs to reduce its military personnel in the region. There are some accounts which say that US still has some 45,000 military personnel in 11 West Asian countries. There are some accounts which say there are 30,000 US personnel. There are some 3,500 military personnel in Iraq and Syria even now. What peace are they ensuring over there? They are at most getting attacked more regularly than earlier. And that only is going to call for a retaliation from the US, which is not going to solve the situation at all. So that is again something I do feel that for peace building, these are some measures US needs to take first. I do feel the best effort which was perhaps made, and when I say best, it is from the perspective or from the point of view of what it achieved. Solely on the basis of what it achieved, I felt the Abraham Accords really helped bring some kind of stability into the region. And that, of course, went out the window when Israel-Hamas, when the war broke up. And but there was, in those 3 years, since 2020 till about 23, in those 3 years, there was, and Saudi Arabia and Israel were on the brink of joining hands together. It was about to happen when the war broke out, and that just put everything out of its place. So these were some of my thoughts on what US should not do and what it should do in terms of achieving peace in the West Asian region. And there are along with that, I also had a few thoughts on you see, the world has changed. And as I mentioned this earlier as well, the global south has risen. It is rising like it has never risen before. It has become part of the most pivotal platforms. The G20 is now going to be representing a major chunk from the African continent, which should have happened long ago. Okay, anyways, it's better late than never, but it has happened now. The global south needs to be involved more, because the nations which are fighting these wars are mostly, international wars. Of course, they are Russia, US, and they need to also now understand that the global south is an equally relevant voice in the entire world. Also, I do feel there are strategic interests like big economies like the US have in upcoming powerful nations and upcoming economies. So again, as I mentioned earlier, aggressive diplomacy needs to be put aside, and they need to understand that they also have interests in other economies which are coming up. Bring them on the same level playing field, and then make an attempt at dialogue, and that can achieve any kind of peace in the West Asian region or any other region for that matter. So that is what I wanted to share as far as your topic was concerned. And if I'd love to hear if there's anything else you'd like to share on it or your views, I would love to interact. And that's about it.